everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Corey's Sports Corner. We are here once again talking about the XFL. Week 2 has just been completed, and man, oh man, what a week of crazy football action that we had. I must say, the games were different, very different this week as opposed to week 1 when you had all these teams feeling each other out. You still kind of had that feeling out phase going, but man, there were some statements made in this week. Some real statements that were made, and I gotta say, there's a couple of teams I have as my front runners from last week, and I still hold that to be true. But we're gonna roll through these games one by one. All right, so let's start off with game 1. Once again, you had the DC Defenders kicking off the week for the XFL. They took on the New York Guardians. This game was not even close. It wasn't even close at all. DC dominated this game. They took control. They had no mercy. They were out for blood. They are making a statement. This is the best team in this league by far. I have no doubts in my mind about that. DC goes on, wins this game 27-0. 27-0. That's nuts. I mean, for a league that's showcased that all these teams so far, with the exception of maybe Tampa Bay, are pretty even, DC really made a statement in this game. For the New York Guardians, you had Cook, the best rusher on the day, 10 attempts, 39 yards, not particularly good. You had McGloin, 8 of 19 for 44 yards and 2 picks. Your starting quarterback threw 2 picks, didn't even get to 50% completion percentage, and not even 50 yards through the air passing. I think that really does go to show just how dominant this DC defense is. They had Williams come in at the end of the game, and he outperformed McGloin, 4 of 8 for 51 yards. I mean, there was nothing that New York could do in this game. Meanwhile, on the DC side of the ball, offensively, you had Pumphrey, 12 attempts, 52 yards. One of those was for 23. You had Presley, 11 attempts, 32 yards. One of those was for 17. Cardale Jones had 1 rushing attempt that went for 14 yards. Meanwhile, Jones, the former Ohio State product, 23 of 37 for 276 yards. One of those was a 40-yard pass. He had 2 touchdowns and a pick. He looked fantastic in this game. He looked so good. The whole team looked really good. Eli Rogers looked, he was targeted 8 times with 5 receptions, 49 yards. Ross had 95 yards receiving, including that 40-yard touchdown. Tompkins had a 34-yard catch. He had 92 yards. I mean, this team's good. This DC team is really, really good. I'm floored with this DC team. I mean, they were just so impressive. They were dominant in every facet of the game. New York had 0 answers. I'm not going to harp on it too much right now because, it's just going to take... If I do that, I'll be here all day talking about people who had great performances. Moving on. Second game of the day was the Tampa Bay Vipers, once again on the road, this time at the Seattle Dragons, who is the team I chose to follow. Dragons get their first win of the season. Ugly, gross, wet first half. It was just sloppy, ugly football. Tampa Bay wound up leading 3-0 at the end of the first half. And then Seattle, Brandon Silvers goes and throws a pick 6, and Tampa's up 10-0 or 9-0. Excuse me. At that point, I'm like, oh damn, Seattle's gonna lose this game at home in front of 30,000 people in CenturyLink Field. I think I think Tampa Bay had a much better game this week. Their offensive production was actually fairly solid. You had Cornelius throwing 16 of 27 for 154 yards, but he had 2 picks, and that's kind of what was their undoing. Flowers also had a pick. He was 3 for 7. But Patrick for the Vipers had 73 yards on the ground, including a 21-yard rush. I mean, he had a pretty good day. I can't fault him. And Smith had a pretty decent day, 11 carries for 46 yards. Yeah, not a bad day for the Vipers. Just offensively, once again, the same thing that happened to him last week happened to him in week 1, happened to him in week 2. Once they got into the red zone, they couldn't finish anything. They had to rely on their defense to score a touchdown for them, which is their only touchdown in franchise history, is a defensive score. Other than that, they have 2 field goals. That is not going to cut it in any league. In any league, you are not going to cut it doing that. This Tampa Bay team, I think, is my candidate for the worst team in the league right now. Meanwhile, if you flip over to Seattle, Seattle had a pretty okay day rushing the ball. Williams with 45 yards on the ground, a long of 19. Nothing too special. Farrow had 45 yards as well. He had 10 attempts, though. Silvers did well in the second half. After the pick 6 was thrown, he really turned his game around, but he still only went 7 of 18 for 91 yards, a touchdown and a pick. They're lucky they were playing Tampa Bay, frankly, and that their defense did a pretty good job. I mean, it's got to be hard for Tampa Bay to have to come into a hostile-ass environment like Seattle, and try and get a dub. But Seattle did not particularly impress me today. I'm sitting in my recliner, sick as hell watching the game, and just, I'm really not impressed with Seattle. I might have made a pretty poor choice of team for the XFL, but it's too late. I chose them, so here we are. It's concerning, but Seattle does, at the end of the day, get their first win of the season, and la-di-da. So that first win was important, don't get me wrong, but yeah, this was an ugly, gross game. I'm just glad the Dragons managed to pull one out. Moving on to the Dallas Renegades and the LA Wildcats. This was at the stadium that is home to LA Galaxy and temporarily the Los Angeles Chargers. I believe, is it next season that they're moving into their new digs with the Rams? I'm not sure. But for now, it's the home of the Chargers. The numbers don't really tell the full story of what happened in this game. Actually, the first half was just kind of how I predicted it was going to be. At the end of last week's video, I made the prediction that it was going to be a shit show. And in the first half, it really was. The offenses didn't really get going until the fourth quarter, if I'm remembering correctly. Let me see. Yeah. So, in the first half, both teams hit a field goal. Third quarter. Oh gosh, it doesn't. This box score doesn't tell you who scored. I think it was. It was Dallas that scored. So Dallas was up 6-3. Then Los Angeles scored, and it was just back and forth. And the fourth quarter was really back and forth. Actually, the fourth quarter was really, really good. A lot of back and forth action, but LA is bad. Yeah. I did also make the prediction that LA was probably going to win this game. I was wrong there. Landry Jones actually did a pretty solid job. Landry Jones did a pretty solid job for them in this game, and man, it just let's get to those stats. You had Artis Payne with almost 100 yards on the ground. He had 2 touchdowns, which That's good for a running back in this league. Averaging 7.1 a carry. He was unstoppable. Landry Jones, 28 of 40, 305 yards. Longest pass was 39 yards. He did have a touchdown, but he had 2 picks, and that's kind of what kept kept LA in the game for the most part, because Dallas definitely was. What? God's sake. Dallas was definitely outplaying them in a lot of this game. But at the end of the day, I think Dallas was just too much. That lead that they had built in the fourth quarter, just, it really was too much for LA to come back from, so they just couldn't finish it off. Although they almost did. I mean, they got a touchdown and a 3-point play in the fourth quarter, so that was actually really, really cool to see. Yeah, Johnson for Los Angeles, 18 of 34, 44-yard completions as long as 2 touchdowns. Those both came in the fourth quarter. Both to Spruce, he had himself a game, 89 yards off 6 receptions, so good for him. He did great. But, LA drops to 0-2 with Tampa Bay. That's a problem, because now they're both in a position where they need to start getting wins, and I'm just really not seeing who they're going to get wins against other than Tampa, maybe. Probably Tampa. So, yeah, ugly game. Fourth quarter, everything picked up, lit on fire. So, we move on to the final game of the week. The St. Louis Battlehawks, my friend Chris, who was with me last week, his Battlehawks fell to the Houston Roughnecks 28-24. St. Louis played a pretty good game. They almost pulled off that comeback as well. Tomu looked pretty damn solid. 30 completions for 284 yards. He had 3 touchdowns through the air and 1 on the ground. He had 8 carries for 32 yards as well. I think Tomu's going to get an NFL deal after this season, because he's just been a total weapon. He's really got to work on those picks, though, because he could put himself and his team in a really bad situation. But moving on from that, this game was a very, very good game. I thought that this was going to be a hotly contested matchup, and it was. I think my my nose for that was actually pretty dang good. But Houston, they were just a little more than St. Louis could handle. So moving on to the Roughnecks, you had the best rusher on the field was Butler, who had 7 carries for 28 yards and a touchdown. Not great. Not horrible, though, but he did get in the end zone, so you can't fault him for that. Walker, and this is the difference in this game. Walker went 20 of 31 for 170 yards, but here's the difference. He threw for 3 touchdowns, but 0 turnovers on that. And that's really what led to the Roughnecks winning this game. St. Louis doesn't turn the ball over in this game. Whole different ball game. And I'd say they likely would have won this game had they not turned the ball over. And, Phillips caught 3 touchdowns from Walker. I mean, he had himself a game. So, it's just kind of it's hard. Speaking is not my strong suit. It's kind of hard to just sit here and think about how close the Battlehawks really came to winning. Just, man, you got to limit those mistakes. They're really, really killers when you're trying to drive and you're trying to put points on the board. Just, you got to not turn the ball over. This is going to be a much shorter episode than last week's was. I'm just going to try and keep it to the really major plays that happened. But I'm enjoying the hell out of the XFL so far. I love it so much. I'm having a blast watching it. It's short. It's 4 games. 4 games. That's it. That's all you have to commit yourself to as a football fan. Instead of, potentially 15 games, you got to be 15, 16 games you got to be keeping your eye on throughout a whole season. So, you know, it was it's fun and I like it, and it's different. It's not great. It's the way someone in the Celtic FC watch group that I go to every single weekend, he described it as professional college football, and I kind of like that thought on it. It's not trying to be anything more. It's not trying to be anything less, but it is certainly fun. I really enjoy the XFL. Coming up for you next week, let's actually pull up the schedule for next week. All right, XFL Week 3, you have the opening game of Saturday, the 22nd. You're going to have the Houston Roughnecks heading to Tampa Bay. That's Tampa Bay's home opener. I definitely predict the Roughnecks taking this game. Tampa Bay has shown me absolutely zero things to show me that they're going to win that game and upset the Roughnecks. You have the Dallas Renegades heading to Seattle to take on the my Dragons in the 5 o'clock slot once again. These are all Eastern Standard Time, by the way. Sunday, you have the New York Guardians taking on St. Louis Battlehawks in their first ever home game at the Dome. So that should be a really good atmosphere. I expect St. Louis fans to turn out and really make this a home field advantage for their Hawks. The Guardians coming off an absolute ass kicking. I'm going to take the Battlehawks. I think they're riding a little higher after last week. I think the momentum is still on their side. They did come close, but with the home crowd behind them, I think it's going to be tough for New York. So I'm taking the Battlehawks in this game. DC at LA to finish out Week 3. I'm taking DC. There's no question. It's going to be interesting to see how they play away from home for the first time, because this is their first road game. Then they'll be heading all the way out to Los Angeles for this. This is going to be a tough game for them. LA's offensive capabilities, I just don't think they're very much there. I'm taking the DC Defenders to lay the smackdown on the Wildcats in Week 3. So, with that said, I'm Corey from Corey's Sports Corner. Thank you for joining me for this video. I'll see you next week. We'll be doing the Week 3 recap for the XFL, and we'll be doing the Columbus Crew. If you're a Major League Soccer fan, I'm going to be doing the Columbus Crew season preview show with a couple of friends of mine, my buddies Jeremiah and James, and that is going to be a lot of fun. So join me for both of those. As the season starts to wind down in the NHL, I'll get to that. I'll get to the playoff preview for that. So join me for all this. I'm Corey Sports Corner. Thanks for stopping by.